guessing that you probably grew up doing some sort of sport or activity when you were a kid. Maybe you played basketball, maybe it was volleyball, maybe for you were on the cheer club, or maybe you were on the debate team or the chess squad, whatever it may have been for you. There was like this event or this activity that you were part of, and you gave all of your effort to doing your very best. For me, it was baseball. I grew up playing baseball. From the time I was about 8 years old, baseball was pretty much my life. And I played Little League, and I was a decent Little League player. I ended up playing in high school, and in my last couple years of high school, I was a pretty good ball player. And then I had a chance to go play baseball at Wake Forest University. And a lot of people hear that, and they're like, man, you must have been an amazing baseball player. My dad and I were having a conversation a few years ago, and we were talking about my baseball career. And here's what my dad said to me. He said, I thought you were a really good baseball player, above average, until you went to play at Wake Forest. My dad and I don't talk anymore. Our relationship is broken. No, I mean, we're good to go. But he was telling the truth. I mean, as a kid, I can remember I wanted to be a professional baseball player, and I was going to put all my time and effort into it. But as I got older, I just never did that. And you know what I settled for? I settled for good. And most of us in our lives, we settle for good. We'll talk about, hey, I want to lose 20 pounds, and we get to 10 pounds. You're like, you know what? That's good enough for me. Or I want to get out of debt. I'm going to pay off all my debt this year. We get like a quarter of the way through that, and we're like, you know what? A quarter of my debt being paid off is good enough. Or maybe it's spiritually. I want to read through the Bible this year, and you read through Genesis, and you get halfway through Exodus, and you're like, a book and a half is good enough for me this year. But that's what we do, right? Too often we settle for good. And I love the way Jim Collins puts it. Maybe some of you have read his book, Good to Great. He says it this way. He says, good is the enemy of great. Few people attain great lives, in large part because it is just so easy to settle for a good life. So many of us settle for a good life. But you know what? I believe Jesus has called us to a great life, to live this incredible, amazing, great life. And I'm not making this up. I mean, this is what Jesus tells us. In John 14:12, Jesus says, I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done and even greater works because I'm going to be with the Father. Now, we hear that, we read that, and we're probably thinking to ourselves, well, this doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Jesus did some pretty incredible things, right? Jesus did some really great things. He healed people. He raised dead people back to life. He feeds a few thousand people a couple of times. What does he have? A few fish, a few loaves of bread. I mean, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty great. And yet here's Jesus who says, look, if you follow me, you're going to do greater things than me. Now, why does Jesus say that? Well, Jesus says this for a couple of reasons. One, if you think about his ministry time, it was pretty short. It was about 3 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. So he honestly didn't do ministry very long. And then the region that he did this ministry in was very small. It was really in the area of Palestine. And so if you think about the location and the region and the time frame, although Jesus does incredible, amazing things, like longevity and the area he does it in are pretty small and short. And he's saying, but if you're a follower of mine, you know what you're going to do? You're going to do even more than me. You're going to influence lives way beyond Palestine. You're going to do this for many years to come. Now, you're going to do it in my name, but you're going to do greater things than me. It's like you're going to live out my mission here in this world, beyond this place and beyond the time that I have here on this earth. Well, what is this mission that Jesus puts these disciples and the followers of Christ on? What's one that we're familiar with? It's one that we talk about quite frequently here at The Journey. We find it in Matthew 28. Jesus is talking to his followers before he heads to heaven, and he says this in chapter 28, verse 19 through 20. He says, therefore go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Jesus is plainly given the disciples and his followers what this mission is here in Matthew. And he says, and you live that out, and you will end up doing greater things than I have done, because you will live out my mission way beyond this place and way longer of a time frame than me. Well, how do you and I live out this mission in our lives? And if we're called to live this out, what does this look like for us? What is Jesus actually calling us to do? There's a conversation that Jesus is having with two of his disciples, James and John. We talked about this not too long ago, and they're actually asking for greater things, right? They're asking for this opportunity to be in these important positions in this new kingdom once Jesus becomes ruler of this kingdom. Well, the other disciples hear what's going on here, and they get a little upset about this, like, well, if they want that, then I want this. And so Jesus brings his disciples together and ends up having a little powwow with them in Mark chapter 10, verse 42. It says, so Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus is this incredible leader. Jesus influences the lives of so many people. Jesus does these great things that we were just alluding to just a second ago. And yet, what does he say here? The best way to make a difference in people's lives, the best way to live out my mission is for you being willing to serve others. And in fact, here's Jesus who does all these amazing things. And what does he say about himself? He's like, I didn't come to be served. He said, I came to serve. We're in this series called Love Agents, and we're talking about how we can be love agents in this world through loving people unconditionally. And I believe one of the best ways that we love people unconditionally is the way that we serve them. And so one of the first things I would say this morning is that love agents live to serve others. Now, I know how your minds think. You hear that word serve and serving others, and you're ready for me to throw out, and that's why we need you to serve in the nursery, right? That's exactly where our minds tend to go. We talk about service in the church. And yeah, we do need people to jump in and serve. Right? Got a few volunteers out today, so we got some kids that are going to be in classes today, so feel free to do that. But we're actually talking about something much bigger and broader than what happens here on a Sunday morning. To be a love agent means that we live a life of serving others. And it's not just something that we do on a Sunday here in church. But we've got to understand what that means from us. We've got to understand what this calling is that God has called us to. And how do we get to this place where we can fully love others unconditionally by serving them with everything that we have? There's an interaction in the Old Testament between these two gentlemen, Elijah and Elisha. To this day, I still don't understand why God would put these two people together, because it is so confusing. But their first connection, their first interaction, I think there's a lot we can learn for ourselves about what it means to be love agents and to this life of service we've been called into. We find it in 1 Kings chapter 19. Starting with verse 19, it says, so Elijah went and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, plowing a field. There were 12 teams of oxen in the field, and Elisha was plowing with the 12th team. Elijah went over to him and threw his cloak across his shoulders and then walked away. We have Elijah. Elijah is a prophet of Israel. God has chosen Elijah for this role. And basically what happens is God comes to Elijah and says, here's what I need you to tell the people of Israel. And then Elijah's job was to go tell the people of Israel what God had just told him to tell them. Then we have Elisha, who is this farmer. He's out in the fields. He is doing his job. He is doing his work. But then there's a strange thing that happens. Elijah goes over to Elisha and puts his cloak around Elisha, and he walks away. Doesn't say a word, doesn't tell Elisha why he does this. He just does it, and then he walks away. Now, this was a powerful symbol in those days of someone saying, I want you to follow me. It's like, I'm going to take you under my wings, right? It's like a bird. I'm going to take you under my wings, and I want to bring you along, and I want you to be my student. I'm going to be your teacher, and I'm going to teach you. I want you to be my disciple. And so this is what Elijah is asking of Elisha. I want you to come and follow me. But the crazy thing is that Elisha knows exactly what Elijah is asking of him. Look at the first part of verse 20. Elisha left the oxen standing there, ran after Elijah, and said to him, First, let me go and kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I will go with you. What's Elisha do? He stops working. Like I said, Elisha does this and takes off. Elijah does this, and then Elisha experiences this, and he runs after Elijah and says, Hey, let me go tell my parents, let me go tell my family goodbye, and then I'll come and follow you. But notice what Elisha doesn't do. He doesn't tell Elijah, you know what, how about we go grab some coffee? Let's go have lunch, let's talk this out a little bit. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say to Elijah, you know what, I want to get my friends together, and I'm going to look for some pretty good advice from them, and let me talk to them, and I'll get back to you. He doesn't say, let me sleep on this. You know, I'm going to sleep on this tonight, and I'm going to wake up in the morning, and I'll come in, I'll give you my answer. He doesn't even give the Christian response, right? He doesn't even say, hey, let me pray about this, and I'll get right back to you, right? He doesn't even say that. Elisha is ready to do what Elijah has in store for him. He says, let me go tell my family goodbye, and then I'll come and follow you. Look at the rest of verse 20. Elijah replied, go on back, but think about what I have done to you. Elijah says, hey, Elisha, here's the deal. You go do what you need to do, but I need a response pretty quickly. We've got work to do. God's got something for us to do, and I need you to go do this quickly and come back so we can move forward in this mission that God has us on. Well, how does Elisha respond? Verse 21. So Elisha returned to his oxen and slaughtered them. He used the wood from the plow to build a fire to roast their flesh. He passed around the meat to the townspeople, and they all ate. Then he went with Elijah as his assistant. So we got to assume he runs and tells his family goodbye, and he comes back. He takes his oxen. He slaughters his oxen. He takes his plow. It's made out of wood. He turns it into a grill. We talked about grilling last week and the importance of that and eating together, right? He turns it into a grill. He barbecues this ox meat, probably wraps it in bacon. I know that's not kosher, but everything's better in bacon, right? So he probably, whatever he does, he cooks it, he barbecues it, and then he feeds his ox to the townspeople that are there. And then what does he do? Then he goes and he follows Elijah. What can we learn about the mission that we have been called to from what we see here with Elijah and Elisha? Well, here's the first thing I would say is that love agents know they have a higher calling. Elisha's a pretty normal dude. I mean, he's a farmer. He's making a living. He's growing food. But think about what he spends his day doing. He spends his day basically looking at ox butt all day, right? And the work he does is hard, and it's probably sweaty, and these ox are throwing up all this dirt dust, and it's all over his body, and he's probably stepping in ox poo. I mean, this is a nasty job, but it's probably a good life for Elisha. Here's why I say this. Scholars say that because he was in charge of this 12th team, he was actually in charge of all 12 teams. There were 12 teams there. That was his job. He was really the leader of all of these groups of farmers that are doing this job, right? That are doing this plowing. So he had a pretty important job. And so here we have Elisha. He's got a really good life, but God is calling him to something greater. God has this higher calling for Elijah. And you and I, we hear this term, this phrase, higher calling, and our minds automatically go to paid ministry. We think if you get a higher calling, you're called to paid ministry, that you're called to work in a church, that you're called to be a pastor, you're called to be a missionary, you're called to some sort of religious work, that term higher calling is all about getting paid for this ministry, this work that you do. But for most people, your higher calling is right where you are planted. It's where you work. It's where you live. It's where you play. It's where you shop. It's your neighbor. It's your family. It's your co-workers. It's for the person that you've been praying for these past couple of weeks that God would put into your life that you can show this unconditional love to. That is a higher calling. And every single one of us, if we follow Jesus, we are called to this higher calling. And so when Jesus talks about these greater things in John, it's because we understand that we are called to something greater than ourselves. We are called to this life of servanthood. But there's something greater for us to do. Something that's bigger for us to be involved with. Because we live a life of serving others. But why don't we fully accept that higher calling and live this life of servanthood today? Why can't we see that mission of Jesus and understand serving others as the way that we can live this life out? And I think it's because we're too much like Elisha was at one point. We're stuck behind that ox. We're still holding on to the plow, and we can't let go of it. And yet we look at Elisha here, and he seems to know what God has called him to. He seems to know that God has this higher calling for him. So what does he do? He comes back, he gets rid of his ox, and he burns his plows. Why would Elisha burn his plows? Well, I think for Elisha, he was getting rid of his excuses. Because think about this. He could go with Elijah, and Elijah could say, hey, come follow me, and they start to do some things, and Elisha's like, you know what? This work's kind of hard. Like, I don't know if this higher calling's really for me. I've got other things that are probably more important than this. I'm not really feeling this, Elijah. Maybe I need to go back home. You know what? My oxen, they're still waiting for me. My plow, it's got my name on it. It's ready to go. And so Elisha comes in and says, I don't want to have to make excuses for this. I want to make sure that I am fully engaged in this mission that God has me on. And so he burns the plow so he doesn't have to think about these excuses. He can just live the life that God has called him into. And maybe that's the thing you and I need to do. That love agents burn their plows. What are those plows for us? What are those excuses that we have? And I'll be honest with you, there are many of them out there. Let me share a few with you of these plows that we probably need to burn in our lives so we can live this life of servanthood that we've been called to and get rid of these excuses that we have. Here's the first thing I would say is that love agents burn their calendar. Some of you are like, yep, that sounds great. I would love to burn my calendar. But our calendar is important, right? We've got all of our stuff in there. We got work and we got family. We got all these different things that are part of that. And without our calendar, we wouldn't know what to do. We wouldn't know how to exist and live our life. We got this meeting and work project and kids activity and kids activity and kids activity and kids activity. And maybe we get a little break here so we can sleep. But there's all this stuff that we have on our calendar, and we don't like our calendar interrupted. We don't like for something to be thrown into our calendar like, yeah, you know what? I'm really busy. I got a lot of things that are happening. I'm a busy person. I'm an important person. And then God's like, no, I got something I need you to do. I got a person I need you to connect with. I've got someone that I need you to serve. And you're like, I'm sorry, God. I'm just, look at my calendar. You've seen my calendar. Where and how am I going to do this? We don't like interruptions into our schedules. Well, maybe it's time that we burn our calendars. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German pastor and theologian. He once wrote this. He said, we must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. We must not assume that our schedule is our own to manage, but allow it to be arranged by God. How many times has God jumped into your calendar? How many times has God interrupted your schedule? Better question is, how many times has that happened and you've experienced that and you've said, I don't have time? Last week we talked a little bit about this idea, and I know that our group was talking about this, like where do we find time to jump in and to love on people, and talking to a few other group leaders, and it was the exact same conversation. Where do we have time? That's a great question. Where do you have time? Where do I have time to allow God to use me to serve the lives of others? Well, that means we burn our calendars. That means we maybe leave a moment in our calendar that's open that says, hey, and this maybe is our prayer, hey, God, I've got an open lunch on Thursday. Put somebody in my heart that I need to contact and have lunch with. Or you know what, hey God, I've got this kids' activity. You know what, I'm just going to sit there for an hour and a half while they practice. Hey God, who should I invite to come with me? And we'll grab some coffee and we'll just sit there and we'll just have a time to talk together. Or, hey, God, I got a little time on Saturday. Maybe I need to go mow their yard. Maybe I need to go wash their cars. Maybe I just need to watch their kids for an hour so they can sleep. Whatever it may be, like we can make time. We choose not to. But love agents burn their calendars and allow God to interrupt our lives so that we can fully serve other people. And so maybe that's a step that you need to take and I need to take to get rid of the excuses that we have to serve others. Here's another one. Love agents burn their feeling of obligation. Can we be honest for a moment that most of us don't like to serve? Can we just say that? I mean, it's true. I mean, most people do not like to serve others. And the reason we serve is because we see it as this obligation, especially in the church setting. In a church setting, it's an obligation. I'm going to serve because I want these people to like me and I want them to keep me around, right? That's kind of this feeling that we have, and so we serve out of obligation. It's not something that we feel like, hey, I've got to do this and I want to do this, but it's something we do out of obligation. Serving isn't an obligation. Serving is something that you and I get to do. It's something we get to do. And love agents understand this. Every Monday, I send out a text message to our staff. And my question is pretty simple. I say, hey, what were your wins from yesterday? What happened on Sunday that was great and wonderful, and experiences, conversations, whatever it may have been. And then over the course of the day, staff are shooting out all these things that happen. Because we don't want to talk about the bad stuff. We always go to bad stuff, right? What are the challenges? What are the things that didn't work? It's like, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about these wins. We're going to celebrate. This past Monday, Casey Eggleston, she helps to facilitate our groups ministry here at The Journey. She sent us a text, and here was a text that she said this: as some of you know, I was serving in the nursery yesterday, and various staff offered assistance after a massive diaper blowout happened right in my lap. Perhaps some would be repulsed, but it actually just reminded me how much I love the tiny humans. And also what a great object lesson for life and ministry in general. I would put it this way: serving others is being willing to be pooped on. In the name of Jesus, of course, but it's this willingness to be pooped on. This is the most poop jokes I've used in a sermon in a long time, but I think that's the last one. Serving others is not an obligation unless we turn it into an obligation. We serve others because we understand this higher calling we have been called to. We serve others because we understand and live out this mission that Jesus has for us. It becomes who we are, what we think. It becomes our DNA. I know Casey, and for Casey, servanthood is just a part of the person that she is. It should be a part of who we are too. Now admit, this mindset is important in this setting here in the church, but it's even more important in the world that we live in and the people that are in our lives. And one of the best things that we can do is to burn this feeling of obligation. Here's the last thing I would say about love agents. love agents burn the phrase, "What's in this for me?" Like there's this one thing, like we feel like we have this obligation to serve, and that's why we serve, not because it's a part of who we are, just because of something we feel like we're supposed to do. But I think the bigger issue for us as followers of Christ is this question right here: what's in this for me? We've got this feeling, and I don't know if it's an American thing or a human thing, a little bit of both, but we feel like if I give myself to someone else, if I serve someone else, if I show unconditional love to them, I want to know what's in this for me. And maybe you ask yourself that question when you serve, like, hey, I'm jumping in to help with Journey Kids. What's in this for me? Or I'm going to help with the worship team. What's in this for me? Or I'm going to help at Generosity Feeds. What's in this for me? If that's the question we're asking, I think we're asking the wrong question. And this is specific to those of us that are followers of Christ. Here's the actual question we need to be asking. Do I really want to follow Jesus? Like, that's the question we need to ask. Not what's in this for me, but do I really want to follow Jesus? And maybe this is something you're working through. Maybe this is something you're struggling with, and you and God are kind of going back and forth with this. But if you've been following Jesus for a long time and you still ask that question, what's in this for me? You're missing the point of everything. Jesus said, I came not to be served, I came to serve. And that's the mentality that you and I need in our own lives, that we are not here to be served. We came to serve others. And it's not about what's in this for me, it's what's in this for the people that I'm serving around me. Honestly, Jesus gives us the best example of this. It's in John chapter 13. It's at the Last Supper. Here's what it says. It says, before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. There's time for supper. The devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and he would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Washing feet was routine practice in those days. And I don't know if you've had a high school son in your house or have one right now, or you remember those days. Their feet are pretty nasty, right? We've got one and his feet are gross, but nothing like people back in those days. Think about it. They didn't wear shoes. They didn't have socks. They walked in the dust and the dirt, and sanitation was pretty much unheard of at that time. And so you can just kind of imagine what their feet were like. They didn't have nail clippers. They didn't have pedicures. They didn't have the fish in the bowl that you stick your feet in and they eat all the dead skin off your feet. They didn't have that. They didn't have any of it. Their feet were absolutely gross and nasty. And so when you would go to someone's house, if you were invited there, then it was the job of the person who had the lowest position in the house. So often it was the servants to come and wash the people that were invited there to wash their feet. So it's kind of, again, imagine those nasty feet, and there's this basin of water, and that's the servant's job, just to wash and cleanse the feet of the people that were in your home. Here's Jesus, who's invited these disciples to this dinner. What does he do? He doesn't do what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to just say, hey, you over there, you come and wash their feet. That's not what Jesus does. Jesus takes off his robe, puts a towel around his waist, and he does the role of a servant, and he washes the feet of his disciples on that evening. When Jesus says, I didn't come to be served, I came to serve, he means that. He lives that out. He shows his disciples in that moment at that dinner exactly the life that they're supposed to live. Now, they're going to see even more of this than in the next few hours as he is executed and crucified. But Jesus doesn't ask, like, hey, what's in this for me? I'm going to do this for you. What's in this for me? Jesus understands this life was all about serving others, making a difference in the lives of so many. And yet you and I, we struggle with that. We get caught up in that, what's in this for me? We get caught up in this idea that there's this obligation that we have. No, we're called to serve and to live that life every day. That it should become a part of who we are, that we are looking for those opportunities to serve others. Not to be served, but to serve. And to serve with this incredible, unconditional love. An amazing example set forth by Jesus for us. How do we do that? What does this look like? What kind of steps can we take? I love this interview that took place in December 1972. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was doing an interview on NBC, and he was asked this question by the interviewer. The question was, what message have you for young people? And here was the response he gave. He said, I would say, let them be sure that every little deed counts, that every word has power, and that we can, everyone, do our share to redeem the world in spite of all absurdities and all frustrations and all disappointments. My question for us is, what little deed do you need to do this week? What word of encouragement do you need to share with someone else? You know, we've been talking about these people in our lives that we've said, hey, God, just show us who this person is. Who's this person in my life that I need to show unconditional love to? And we talked about put them on our hit list, right? And then last week we talked about the importance of inviting them to food, to eat together, to have coffee or drink together, whatever it may be, just this interaction where we can just get to know them and listen and hear where they're coming from. There's another step here. And that step is, this mission is, if we so choose to accept it, is this week to serve them in some small, tangible way. We hear this idea of greater, and we think, I've got to do something big, I've got to do something massive. No, that's not what this is about. It's those small things that we can do, those small investments in someone's life that God can and will use to change and transform them, maybe for now here on this earth, but hopefully for eternity. The only way we get there is by you and I understand that we are called something much greater than ourselves, and that we don't settle for good. We live this greater life that God has for us in this world by being love agents that love unconditionally.